This video contains spoilers for Project Moon and expects you to be somewhat familiar with the game, if not evaporate now. So, I'm sure you, the viewer that is watching, is aware of the fact that the Project Moon franchise is packed with secret lore and symbolism, but I figured out that with that lore, I can make a bunch of theories about the future cantos. Like, did you know that Magic Bullet outis suggests that she has a habit of self-destruction, that putting herself at risk gives her a kick, and that she might have sacrificed herself in the past? That, and much more of outis' personality, is revealed in a silly little Kurt Cobain ego and identity, so let's shortly look at that today. To start, let's look at the abnormality it's connected to find out the most important themes. So, their Freischütz origin talks about a hunter making a deal with the devil, receiving a gun with bullets that will puncture everything, but the contract said that the last bullet would puncture the heart of his most beloved. And, as you could guess, the hunter's most beloved heart was his own, symbolizing the selfish nature of a hunter, hurting creatures around him and valuing its own life the most, seeing themselves as different beings than the ones hunted. And when the hunter's heart was finally punctured, he metamorphosed, traveled worlds, and did as he pleased in a selfish way. And there's also themes of your soul going to hell after using it, becoming the devil that made the deal with you in the first place, having to pull the trigger now in its place to gather the souls of others, symbolizing some sort of loop. Now, this loop could be about a certain cycle of violence we all know and love, as flavor text hints at the fact that their Freischütz only reacts to dying things, not love or a good deed. Now, fun fact, their Freischütz is based off of early folktales about two hunters attempting to forge magic bullets through arcane means, often using unethical recipes to do so, like stealing lead from a church and pouring it through the eyes of a skull of a woman who died during childbirth. Yeesh. There's several iterations of the story, but it usually never ends well for the hunters. All in all, it's about being power hungry and having a goal that inflicts hurts upon others, including yourself, that cannot be stopped whatsoever. In fact, the way it references unethical ways of collecting the bullets and the ones you love getting hurt in the process makes it feel like a blind obsession. Quick side note, why doesn't Faust have this E.G.O or ID since it's all about making deals with devils and demons? And why doesn't outis have blind obsession? But it's also about not really caring about anything other than violence anymore. Very interesting. So let's move on to outis' Magic Bullet ID so we can connect those themes more to her. To start, her uptie story is packed with secrets. The way their Freischütz is talking to outis to warn her is quite interesting. When you are all left by your lonesome, after the trumpets of the apocalypse roar, you have no choice but to put that miserable bullet through your own temple. But instead of outis being afraid, she's intrigued. The deal with Freischütz reminds outis of the first time she took a drag of a smoking pipe, specifically the pipe of Freischütz. Smoking, a habit that's also self-destructive, which I feel like is done so on purpose. But when Freischütz asks her more about the deal she had already accepted, outis doesn't elaborate and instead is dismissive, which makes me think that although outis is subconsciously aware of her self-destructive nature and the future that comes for her, she doesn't want to acknowledge it, probably due to her role and her pride, or she can't handle it. This self-destructive nature is further hinted at the fact that outis has the bloodbath E.G.O gift, called Wrist Cutter. I don't think I need to explain that one. But outis might have not wanted to acknowledge the self-destructive nature of the deal because of that blind obsession she has towards her goal. And I'll let the dialogue describe itself, because I just love the writing of Project Moon. The child had nothing left but her singular goal, that she would survive these ordeals and return home, no matter what. She would give anything if she could return, even the cruelest of clauses would be mercy and a blessing. The bullet will pierce everyone, everything that stands in her way. In the end, it will return her to her home. It will fly past all those that the child loved, even those that she loved when she could not, and eventually fly towards her own skull. I think this could explain the themes of outis' canto. I mean, we've had references to her wanting to return home several times, and the fact that she could destroy everything in her way to do so. And the line, quote, even those that she loved when she could not, is incredibly interesting to me. I feel like there could have been a moment in outis' backstory where she was so obsessed with something, either with returning home or with the violence and strategy of the smoke noir, that she didn't have the ability to love certain people, even if deep in her heart she did. And she blames herself for that, as the writing of Project Moon is intentional, because right when it talks about the one she couldn't love, and that she's willing to deceive anyone for her goal, it talks about the bullet flying towards her skull, leading me to believe that guilt and self-harm is a big part of outis' story and character, which is even more supported in the uptie story, as right when the bullet is about to hit her, she has a confident grin, thinking back about how she used to not acknowledge her self-destructiveness, realizing she also deceived herself, and that her true feelings are happiness when meeting her end. She is ready to have her son turn to hell and give up her life in the lobotomy story, probably to save others in the department. She also willingly deceived herself that she was the most important person in her life, even though she loved others and her home so deeply, which probably also has a double meaning. And remember how I talked about how Freischütz only reacted to violence? Well, a chatter voice line talks about how this probably happened to outis too. Quote, when all my personnel began fleeing in terror, I held my firearm fast, its muzzle glowing red hot, and sought my target in the dull gloom of the chemical smoke. She somehow felt dullness in the smoke war, which is odd since I remembered Valencia talking about how disgusting it was. Maybe depends on way you're positioned. As Valencia was at the front of the war with the bugs, outis might have been more at the back near the smoke. But this dullness gave outis the need to hunt. For example, in her post-update story, she talks about how she sees her targets and herself. She said that she used to worry about the definition of what she killed, but Hot helped her see that they're all just targets, as a hunter would see their victims, something different than from themselves. And even before she joined Lobotomy Corporation, she must have been a hunter type of person too, as she explains that she's aware of the fact that the end of the magazine will kill her. She justifies it with, quote, "It will strike me down with painless precision, as I have done so to all that I have set my sights on." There is a slight hesitation or a moment of thought every time outis is reminded of her past though, including here, where she realizes that she has seen the humans in the smoke war, or her other previous victims, as nothing but targets and numbers, and her guilt over that is manifested in her self-hatred. She doesn't mind being shot down by a bullet, since she has done the same exact thing to countless of others. Now, I also want to touch on her role as a high-ranking officer in the Smoke War, and in the E.G.O, as several voice lines of her in Magic Bullet talk about just following orders. For example, when you hit extra conditions, you get, quote, "Should the manager order me to fire, bullets will penetrate the target, wherever it is, whichever it is, whoever it is, even the loved ones." It is again interesting that she hesitates when it's about loved ones, making me wonder more and more if outis might have been ordered to kill someone she loved, which could explain how she was able to feel love for others but not execute it, literally, how she wanted to. The other moment where she talks about following orders is when she explains that others might see her as a hero, while others think she's a cold-blooded killer, even though all she had to do was follow the manager's orders to the letter. This is about how some commend the actions of war violence, while others could paint you as a hero, maybe highlighting a certain us versus them mentality when it came to the Smoke War. Now, when looking at their skills for the ID, it's a lot of pride and wrath. Now, then, pride for outis is about the belief that she was justified in her destructive path towards her goals, as pride is symbolized as a wheel in its Pecatule form, meaning it's also symbolizing a certain strive towards something, development and a pursuit of perfection. Not only that, but also her dismissiveness about the nature of it all, to force herself into the role of perfection. She doesn't question it, in fact she knows that the last bullet will hit her, but she finds it a fair karma towards her previous enemies. This is how she wants to atone for her sins. Then that destructive wrath is of course symbolized in her Ignition Wrath skill, as wrath is senseless violence. It doesn't matter who gets in her way, even loved ones, as they will be shot by her bullet in pursuit of her goals. Speaking of bullets, her ego is more so focused on the bullet itself for some reason, and holds a bit less lore than the identity. In fact, I think identities, although they are mirror worlds and not directly connected to our base sinners as much as egos are, still have lore to bring. And I've only analyzed egos on my channel really, so let me know if you'd like to see me analyze more identities. Anyways, this ego is of course pride too, and the voice lines really focus on the fact that the bullet won't miss at first, as it follows a certain destiny. Now, destiny is something that has come across for a lot of sinners like Faust and Sinclair, but it's interesting to see it for outis too. But the fact why the voice line is focused on the bullet is because there are of course extra voice lines depending on how many bullets you have and if outis is awakened or corroded. I want to look at these voice lines closely too for a second. Outis talks about following fate when she set the second bullet. Now again, I know that fate in general is a theme for Freischütz, but I can't help but wonder if that means something for outis. But what I find most interesting is outis' belief that she's taking a path that you can't go back on and her feeling around this ID. Now of course, if you follow the path of Freischütz, you turn into the devil yourself, which also makes me wonder if outis might have had some sort of mentor or person that tricked her into becoming who she is now. But most of the voice lines are about following the path and destroying everything in its way, and interestingly enough, the normal lines talk about following the land horizon, while the corroded talks about sea horizon. Google gave me nothing, so my own interpretation is that it's easy to follow the horizon when you're on land, but when corroded, aka you follow the horizon of the sea, you sink down into the water, maybe either down to hell or down stuck in the waters of your obsession. The horizon then, in my opinion, may be symbolizing outis' end goal, like her home, but you can never really touch the horizon, as sadly as the earth is not flat. You can move towards the sun on the horizon, or the rainbow if you like, but you shall never reach it. Maybe meaning outis' home is something she can't even reach, even if she's super obsessed with doing so. This can be for a lot of reasons, but maybe she's also just not ready to return home. Maybe she has too much guilt. Then to move on, following this path gives her a feeling of grandiosity and power, explaining the pride skill of course, but also describing outis' character in general. She is confident in her own abilities, after all. But only her abilities. But the 6th and 7th bullet... become more sad as she loses that feeling of superiority she clung onto at first, uncovering her deepest layer again, that layer of self-destruction and self-loathing. She basically admits that she again knew the path of despair that she sought, and that the bullet's trajectory is something she accepted, or well, that is what she says when awakened. When corroded, she talks about being left alone in this inferno, and even losing the will to move forward but still continuing on. It might be due to the despair for actions that outis has lost the motivations or the emotions that inspired her to take that path of despair that she wanted to do in the first place. That slowly, she was trapped under the pressure, that she lost the way to move forward, but the bullet, which I symbolized as a sort of wrath, still continues on, like a senseless violence. Now, what do I make of this? Well, personally, my own theory is that outis might have had some sort of goal that she was working towards before her goal turned to returning home. It might be that this goal of hers was to be realized through unethical means, maybe through meeting someone that outis struck a deal with or learned from. In return to realize that goal, outis might have had to sacrifice the people around her, those she loved or did not know how to love, starting out with pride and a feeling of powerfulness, to only end up losing everything, turning her lonely and giving her the habit of punishing herself for her misdoings, either through self-harm habits or through straight up accepting suicide. And it ends with her alone in an inferno, with a wrath that cannot be stopped, perhaps symbolizing that at the end of it all, she ended up in the smoke war, a war which made her even more keen to violence, as the dullness of her loneliness taught her how to hunt targets, forcing her more and more into the role of whatever high position she had at the smoke war, never letting go of her goal, no matter who gets in the way. Now, lastly, the sin affinities for the E.G.O are of course again pride and wrath, which I described previously. However, lust is also a part of it now. I assume this might be a reference to her loved ones, how she pushed them away to get to her goal, as human relationships can be symbolized with lust, but it could also just reference the cycle of turning into the devil that tricked you into the first place, sharing the cycle together. The fact that the passive refers to the seventh bullet also tells me outis' choice of following the path. She knew that it was basically suicide, but continued on. Also, I wonder if outis might have done some sort of suicide mission to protect her home, just like she did in the update story of the identity. But there are also several references to outis' self-destructive behavior in general, no matter if the motivation would have been noble or not. All in all, Magic Bullet does a wonderful job at describing who outis really is, someone who loathes herself for the damage she's done, but not in a way of self-pity, but she thinks she deserves punishment, some sort of karma, and maybe she could use her self-destructiveness as a means to move forward. She thinks she deserves karma for not only hunting others in the smoke war, the thousands of deaths in her hand, but also for pushing those she loved away, only to end up lonely at the end of her story. But she might have done so to protect others, to only protect the ones she loved, as she did not know how to show her love otherwise, deceiving herself that she's the most important person to herself, so that the bullet hits her at the end of her update story, either to harm herself as punishment or to protect the other workers at the lobotomy facility. But I wonder if our outis is even ready to come home, because maybe she's obsessed with the route instead of actually returning home. But who knows? So, that was that. Let me know if you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe and leave a comment with your own theories. And did you enjoy the shorter analysis video like this, where I just look up one app now and its related ID and E.G.O at a time? Makes it easier for me to drop videos more regularly that aren't shorts. Thank you to my YouTube members, Paparet and Thankskel, for giving me an extra hand. You can also become a member for only $1 and get mentioned at the end of my video. Bye now!
You take a whiff of this shit? Yeah, this is that nefarious abnormality moongrass. This shit is straight out of a laboratory. Martina puffed on this shit once and she slept for 96 hours. This shit is what killed Carmen. Rip my nigga for real, dog.